The Galactic Military Academy had trained warriors from over 200 species across the known galaxy. Their halls echoed with the footsteps of beings who could shatter mountains with their bare hands, who possessed natural armor that could deflect plasma bolts, who could see through walls or manipulate gravity itself. But, on this particular day, as news of the Battle of Kepler 442b reached the Academy's communication center, every single one of those powerful beings fell silent. The transmission was simple: single Terran Marine, designation Marcus Chen, held defensive position Alpha 7 for 43 hours against overwhelming Void Collective forces. Casualty report: enemy losses, 2,847 confirmed kills. Terran losses, 0. What followed wasn't just disbelief. It was a complete reshaping of how the galaxy viewed the small, seemingly fragile species from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. This is the story of how one human proved that sometimes, the most dangerous predator isn't the biggest or the strongest, it's the one that refuses to quit. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Galactic Military Academy's training grounds as Commander Thexari reviewed the day's roster. His 6 arms moved with practiced efficiency, sorting through data pads containing the performance metrics of cadets from across known space. The Vultanian's crystalline exoskeleton caught the light, creating rainbow patterns that danced across his workspace. Another disappointing cycle, he muttered to himself, his translator converting the clicks and hisses of his native tongue into standard galactic. The latest batch of recruits showed promise, certainly. The Kandorian heavy assault specialists could punch through titanium with their bare fists. The Zarafi scouts possessed natural cloaking abilities that made them nearly invisible even to advanced sensors. The Gorvok engineers could manipulate matter at the molecular level. Yet something felt missing from their training. A quality that Thexari couldn't quite identify, despite his 3 centuries of military experience. His contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Zara Krishnamurti, one of only 12 humans currently enrolled at the academy. At barely 5.5 feet tall, she moved with a quiet confidence that belied her small stature. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her brown eyes held an intensity that had caught Thexari's attention during previous training exercises. "Sir, the morning briefing is ready," she reported, her posture perfect despite being less than half his height. Thexari nodded, still amazed by how these Terrans managed to project such presence despite their obvious physical limitations. No natural armor, no enhanced strength, no special abilities beyond slightly above average intelligence, and an inexplicable tendency toward stubbornness. The briefing room filled quickly with cadets representing the military elite of 47 different species. Captain Vorth, a massive Brutani whose people had conquered 17 star systems through sheer physical might, took his place near the front. His rocky hide bore the ceremonial scars of his homeworld's warrior tradition, and each of his movements seemed to shake the reinforced flooring. Beside him sat Cadet Silty HYSS, a reptary whose ancestors had ruled through fear and superior technology for millennia. Her scaled skin shifted color unconsciously, betraying emotions that her species typically kept hidden. Near the back, the ethereal twins Kex and Tex communicated through bioluminescent patterns across their translucent flesh, their conversation visible but incomprehensible to most other species. Lieutenant Krishnamurti found her usual seat among this gathering of what most considered the galaxy's finest warriors. She pulled out an old-fashioned paper notebook, ignoring the amused glances from classmates who relied on neural interfaces and quantum processors for information storage. "Today's exercise," Commander Thexari announced, his 4 primary arms gesturing toward the holographic display that materialized in the center of the room, "will test your ability to adapt to unexpected combat scenarios." The hologram showed a detailed 3-dimensional map of a mining colony on the contested world of Kepler 442b. Rocky terrain dominated the landscape, broken by deep chasms and crystalline formations that would provide both cover and obstacles. Intelligence reports indicated that the Void Collective had established a foothold in the region, using it as a staging ground for their expansion into Galactic Alliance territory. "The scenario is simple," Thexari continued. "A Void Collective assault force has overrun the colony's defenses. A single defensive position remains operational, controlling access to the main evacuation route. Your mission is to hold that position until reinforcements arrive." Cadet Vortha's massive fist struck the table with enough force to crack its surface. "How many enemies are we facing, Commander?" "Approximately 3,000 Void Collective drones, supported by heavy artillery and aerial assault units," Thexari replied without emotion. "The simulation will run continuously until either the position is lost or reinforcements arrive in 48 hours. A collective murmur ran through the room. Even for the Academy's elite, those odds represented a significant challenge. The Void Collective drones were notorious for their relentless advance and complete disregard for casualties. Each stood 7 feet tall, possessed natural chitinous armor, and carried energy weapons capable of melting through most conventional barriers. "Sir," called out Cadet Silty, her scales now showing the deep blue of confusion, "what support assets are available?" "Limited ammunition, basic defensive barriers, and whatever ingenuity you can bring to bear," Thexari answered. "This exercise is designed to test your resourcefulness under extreme pressure." Lieutenant Krishnamurti raised her hand. "Commander, will we be working as teams or individually?" "Individual assessment," Thexari confirmed. "Each cadet will face the same scenario alone. We want to see how each of you responds when stripped of the advantages that your species' natural abilities typically provide." The room erupted in confident chatter. Vorth cracked his knuckles, creating sounds like breaking stones. 48 hours against 3,000 drones? This will be over in 6. "Agreed," Silty hissed, her scales now showing the golden hue of anticipation. "My people have faced worse odds in actual combat." Only Lieutenant Krishnamurti remained silent, her pen moving steadily across her notebook as she absorbed every detail of the terrain map. While her classmates discussed their natural advantages and superior firepower, she studied elevation changes, choke points, and resource distribution patterns. The first simulation began with Cadet Vorth. His performance was impressive by any standard. Using his species' incredible strength and natural armor, he carved through the initial wave of drones like a living battering ram. His massive hands crushed enemy weapons, and his rocky hide deflected most incoming fire. For 6 hours, he held the position through pure aggression and overwhelming physical force. The defensive barriers crumbled under constant assault, but Vorth's own body served as an impenetrable wall. He roared challenges at the advancing drones, his voice carrying for miles across the simulated battlefield. But even Brutani's stamina had limits. As the 7th hour began, fatigue started to show. His movements became slightly slower, his devastating punches marginally less precise. The Void Collective drones, incapable of fear or exhaustion, continued their relentless advance. When Vorth finally fell, overwhelmed by sheer numbers despite his heroic efforts, the Academy's measuring systems recorded his performance: 6 hours and 17 minutes, 847 confirmed kills, position lost to enemy advance. Cadet Silty performed differently but equally impressively. Her natural camouflage abilities allowed her to set ambushes, appearing from nowhere to eliminate entire drone squads before vanishing again. Her advanced technology integration let her hack enemy communication systems, turning their own coordination against them. She lasted 9 hours and 42 minutes, achieving 623 confirmed kills before the drones adapted to her tactics and overwhelmed her position. One by one, each cadet faced the simulation. The ethereal twins used their telepathic abilities to confuse enemy targeting systems. The Kandorians employed their legendary Berserker Fury to create zones of absolute destruction. The Zarathi scouts used hit-and-run tactics that kept the enemy guessing for hours. All performed admirably. None lasted beyond 12 hours. Finally, only Lieutenant Krishnamurti remained. As she approached the simulation pod, her classmates gathered around the observation screens with barely concealed amusement. Compared to the physical specimens who had preceded her, she looked almost fragile. "This should be interesting," Vorth rumbled, his rocky features showing what might have been sympathy. "Humans try hard, but they lack the genetic advantages necessary for real military success." Silty scales rippled with subdued laughter. "Perhaps she will surprise us with some clever tactics. Human intelligence is supposedly above average, after all." Commander Thexari himself took position at the primary observation station. Despite his professional demeanor, he shared his cadet's skepticism. Humans had proven themselves capable of creative thinking and remarkable persistence, but this exercise demanded more than clever problem-solving. The simulation began. Lieutenant Krishnamurti materialized in the defensive position just as the sun reached its zenith in the artificial sky. The mining colony stretched out below her vantage point, its abandoned structures casting stark shadows across the rocky terrain. In the distance, the first wave of Void Collective drones crested a ridge, their black chitinous forms moving with mechanical precision. Unlike her predecessors, Krishnamurti didn't immediately check her weapons or test the defensive barriers. Instead, she spent precious minutes simply observing. Her eyes tracked elevation lines, wind patterns, and the way light reflected off various surfaces. She noted which approach routes offered cover, where bottlenecks naturally occurred, and how the terrain's acoustic properties might be exploited. Only when the drones had advanced to within a kilometer did she finally examine her equipment. Standard Galactic Alliance rifle, 400 rounds of ammunition, 3 defensive barriers, and a basic communication array. Nothing impressive, nothing that her classmates hadn't had access to. The first attack came as expected. 30 drones advanced in standard formation, energy weapons charging as they closed distance. Krishnamurti could have met them with covering fire, could have used the barriers to create a traditional defensive position. Instead, she abandoned the prepared position entirely. "What is she doing?" Vorth demanded, watching as the human sprinted away from the defensible high ground toward the approaching enemy. "Tactical error," SILTHYSS concluded. "Panic response. She's fleeing instead of fighting." But Commander Thexari watched with growing interest. Krishnamurti wasn't fleeing at random. Her movement followed a precise pattern, using natural cover to remain invisible to drone sensors while positioning herself at a specific point on the battlefield. When the drones reached the abandoned defensive position and found it empty, they began spreading out to search for their target. That was exactly what Krishnamurti had anticipated. From her position in a narrow ravine, she opened fire on the scattered enemies. But, rather than attempting to destroy them outright, she aimed for their joints and sensor arrays. Crippled drones stumbled and fell, creating obstacles that hindered their companions' movement. Those that remained operational found themselves channeled into the ravine's narrow confines, where superior numbers meant nothing. Within 20 minutes, the first wave was eliminated. Krishnamurti had sustained no damage and expended only 60 rounds of ammunition. "Efficient," Thexari admitted, making notes on his evaluation pad. But the real test comes with sustained pressure. The second wave consisted of 100 drones, supported by hovering artillery platforms. This time, Krishnamurti employed entirely different tactics. She used the mining colony's abandoned equipment to create improvised explosive devices, turning the industrial machinery into weapons. When the drones advanced, they found themselves walking into a maze of triggered detonations. The artillery platforms, designed to engage targets at long range, found themselves useless as Krishnamurti used the colony's structures to remain constantly under cover. Meanwhile, her precise rifle fire eliminated their targeting sensors one by one, rendering the powerful weapons blind and ineffective. Wave after wave followed. Each time, Krishnamurti adapted her approach. She used psychological warfare, making the drones think they had located her while actually being elsewhere entirely. She employed environmental hazards, triggering rockslides and equipment failures that eliminated dozens of enemies without firing a shot. She even turned the drone's own weapons against them, salvaging energy cells to create improvised mines. Hour after hour passed. The simulation's observers watched in growing amazement as the small human continued to hold her position through methods none of them had even considered. "She's not stronger than the drones," observed one of the Kandorian cadets. "She's not faster than them," added a Zarathi scout. "She's certainly not better armed," Vorth admitted grudgingly. "Then, how is she winning?" demanded SILTHYSS. Commander Thexari was beginning to understand. While other species relied on their natural advantages, humans had evolved something else entirely. Not physical superiority or genetic gifts, but an ability to see connections that others missed, to find solutions where none seemed to exist. As the simulation entered its 20th hour, even the Academy's advanced computers were struggling to generate new challenges. Every tactical approach the system attempted, Krishnamurti found a counter for. Every weapon the Void Collective deployed, she found a way to neutralize or turn against them. She had transformed the mining colony into a killing field designed specifically for her abilities. Every structure had been rigged with traps. Every approach route had been analyzed and prepared for. The terrain itself had become her ally. When the 24th hour arrived, something unprecedented happened. The simulation's monitoring systems detected 0 drone signatures within the operational area. For the first time in Academy history, a single cadet had not merely held a defensive position, but had actively eliminated every enemy unit in the entire exercise zone. Lieutenant Krishnamurti stood alone among the debris of what had once been a Void Collective assault force, her rifle still ready, her eyes still scanning for threats that no longer existed.
The observation room had fallen completely silent. Status report, Commander Thexari requested, though he already knew the answer.
Position secure, sir, Krishnamurti's voice crackled through the communication array.
Requesting orders for the remaining 24 hours.
That was when the message arrived from Galactic Command. What they had thought was a training simulation was about to become terribly, urgently real. The emergency klaxon that echoed through the Galactic Military Academy had never been heard by most of the cadets currently in residence. Its piercing wail cut through the celebrations that had erupted following Lieutenant Krishnamurti's unprecedented performance, instantly transforming the atmosphere from amazement to urgent concern. Commander Thexari's primary hands moved with lightning speed across his command console while his secondary arms gestured for attention from the gathered observers. The holographic display that had been showing the completed simulation flickered and changed, now showing real-time intelligence feeds from across the galaxy. All senior staff to command center immediately, his voice boomed through the facility's communication system.
Code 7 emergency protocols are now in effect. Code 7.
Several of the alien cadets exchanged glances of recognition. Only a few species in the Alliance had actually experienced a Code 7 alert, but all had studied them in their military histories. It meant active, overwhelming threat to Alliance territory with immediate risk to civilian populations. Lieutenant Krishnamurti emerged from the simulation pod, still wearing the standard training gear, her face showing the fatigue of having mentally fought a 24-hour battle. But, even in her exhausted state, she immediately recognized the change in atmosphere around her.
Sir, she addressed Commander Thexari, what's the situation? Before Thexari could respond, Admiral Korvash materialized in the command center via emergency hologram.
The Draconian's massive frame and battle-scarred features commanded instant respect from every being present. His species had been the Alliance's primary military power for over 2 millennia, and his personal combat record was the stuff of legends. Commander Thexari, Admiral Korvash's voice carried the authority of absolute command. I need your assessment of the human cadet's simulation performance.
Immediately.
Sir, Lieutenant Krishnamurti achieved a perfect tactical victory against overwhelming odds, Thexari reported. Her approach was unconventional but devastatingly effective.
Unconventional how? She didn't rely on superior firepower or genetic advantages. Instead, she used environmental factors, psychological warfare, and adaptive tactics to turn the enemy's strength against them. The simulation's AI eventually ran out of viable attack strategies. Admiral Korvash's expression grew even more serious.
That matches our intelligence requirements exactly.
Lieutenant Krishnamurti, step forward.
The human cadet moved to stand before the holographic projection, her posture remaining military perfect despite the obvious irregularity of the situation. Around her, cadets who had been joking about human limitations just hours before now watched in silent anticipation.
Lieutenant,
Admiral Korvash continued, 3 hours ago, the Void Collective launched a full-scale assault on Kepler 442b. The same mining colony you just defended in simulation.
The implications hit the room like a physical blow. Cadet Vortha's rocky features shifted into what his people displayed when confused.
Sir, that's impossible. The simulation was just training.
The simulation was based on real intelligence, Admiral Korvash explained grimly.
We've known for weeks that the Void Collective was massing forces in that sector.
The Academy's exercise was designed to identify tactical approaches for a defense we hoped would never be necessary.
Silty HYSS's scales rippled through rapid color changes, betraying her species' equivalent of shock.
You're saying that attack is happening right now?
I'm saying that attack has already succeeded, Admiral Korvash corrected.
Kepler 442b's defensive forces were overrun in less than 4 hours.
3,000 Void Collective drones, supported by heavy artillery and aerial units, exactly as modeled in your simulation. The silence that followed was absolute. Every cadet in the room had just watched Lieutenant Krishnamurti defeat that exact force, alone. Now they were learning that the real version had destroyed an entire planetary defense network in a fraction of the time.
What about the civilian population?
Lieutenant Krishnamurti asked, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was hearing. Approximately 40,000 miners and support personnel are trapped in the colony's underground shelters, Admiral Korvash replied. The Void Collective is using them as a shield while they establish a permanent foothold. Any attempt at orbital bombardment would result in massive civilian casualties. Sir,
What about sending a full Alliance assault fleet? Asked one of the ethereal twins, their bioluminescent communication patterns flickering with urgency. Admiral Korvash's expression grew even darker. The nearest fleet is 6 days away.
Intelligence indicates the Void Collective will complete their fortification within 72 hours. After that, dislodging them would require a siege that could last months and would almost certainly result in the deaths of every civilian on the planet. Commander Thexari was beginning to understand where this conversation was leading.
Sir, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?
I'm suggesting that we have one option that might work, Admiral Korvash replied.
A single operative, inserted behind enemy lines, could potentially disrupt their operations long enough for evacuation procedures to succeed.
With respect, Admiral, Vorth interjected, his voice rumbling with barely controlled emotion. Sending one soldier against 3,000 Void Collective drones is suicide.
Even our best warriors couldn't survive such odds in reality.
Our best warriors, no, Admiral Korvash agreed. But perhaps someone who doesn't think like our best warriors might have a chance. All eyes turned to Lieutenant Krishnamurti. She stood perfectly still, her mind clearly processing the implications of what was being suggested. Around her, cadets who represented the finest military traditions of dozens of species waited to see how the small human would respond to a mission that amounted to certain death.
Sir, she said finally, what would be the mission parameters?
Simple in concept, nearly impossible in execution, Admiral Korvash replied. Infiltrate the colony, disrupt Void Collective operations long enough to allow civilian evacuation, and hold the position until Alliance forces can arrive.
How long would I need to hold? Minimum 48 hours. Possibly as long as 72.
Lieutenant Krishnamurti was quiet for several seconds, her eyes focused on something beyond the holographic display. When she spoke again, her voice carried absolute conviction.
Sir, I volunteer for the mission. The reaction was immediate and explosive.
Vorth slammed his massive fist into the nearest wall, creating a spider web of cracks.
This is insanity. You're sending her to die. SilTHYSS's scales flashed through aggressive patterns. Even if she succeeds initially, how could one person hold against such numbers for 3 days?
She held for 24 hours in simulation, Commander Thexari pointed out quietly. Simulation, several voices called out simultaneously.
This is real combat against real enemies. With real consequences, Lieutenant Krishnamurti added calmly.
Which is exactly why it has to be attempted. Admiral Korvash studied the human cadet with the intensity of someone making a decision that could affect the fate of millions.
Lieutenant, you understand that this mission has virtually no chance of success by conventional military analysis?
Yes, sir. But conventional military analysis assumes conventional approaches.
And you believe you can succeed where conventional approaches would fail?
I believe that every problem has a solution, sir.
Even if that solution isn't obvious at first. Admiral Korvash was silent for a long moment.
When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority.
Very well. Mission authorization granted. You'll be inserted via stealth transport in 18 hours.
Sir, Commander Thexari interrupted, perhaps we should consider sending additional support. A small team could, no, Lieutenant Krishnamurti said firmly.
Additional personnel would change the tactical requirements completely. This has to be a single operator mission.
Why? Demanded Vorth. Because 3,000 enemies can track and surround multiple targets much more easily than they can hunt down one person who knows how to stay invisible, she explained. A team would have to worry about coordination, communication security, and protecting each other. One person only has to worry about completing the mission.
Admiral Korvash nodded approvingly.
That analysis matches our strategic assessment.
A larger force would be detected and eliminated before reaching the operational zone. What followed was the most intensive briefing in the Academy's history.
Intelligence officers provided detailed maps of the mining colony's layout, including recent modifications made by the Void Collective. Engineers explained the various systems that could be exploited or sabotaged.
Medical specialists outlined treatment for wounds that standard Alliance healing technology couldn't handle.
But it was Lieutenant Krishnamurti who asked the most important questions. Not about weapons or equipment, but about civilian shelter locations, mining operation schedules, and the psychological profiles of Void Collective drone commanders.
The drones themselves are essentially biological robots, she noted during the technical briefing.
But their commanders retain individual intelligence and decision-making capabilities. Correct, confirmed the intelligence officer. Collective overseers typically coordinate between 50 to 100 drones each. So disrupting the command structure would create tactical confusion among the drone units. In theory, yes. But overseers are extremely well protected and highly intelligent opponents. Lieutenant Krishnamurti made notes in her ever-present paper notebook. How quickly do they adapt to unexpected threats? Very quickly. The Void Collective's primary strength is their ability to learn from combat experiences and adjust their tactics accordingly. That assumes they survive the combat experience long enough to learn from it, she replied quietly. As the briefing continued, a strange thing began to happen among the gathered cadets. The initial shock and disbelief gradually gave way to something else. They had all witnessed her simulation performance. They had all seen her accomplish something that their superior genetics and natural abilities couldn't match. Slowly, impossibly, they began to believe that she might actually have a chance. Cadet Vorth was the first to approach her after the formal briefing ended. The massive Brutani, who could have crushed her without effort, spoke with uncharacteristic gentleness. Lieutenant Krishnamurti, he rumbled, my people have a tradition. Before battle, warriors share their strength with those who fight beside them. He extended one enormous rocky hand. Lieutenant Krishnamurti looked up at him, then reached out to place her comparatively tiny human hand against his palm. I cannot give you our physical strength, Vorth continued, but you carry our honor with you. Fight well, little warrior. One by one, the other cadets approached. Silty HYSS offered a reptary battle blessing, her scale showing patterns of respect that few off-worlders had ever witnessed. The ethereal twins shared a telepathic benediction that briefly allowed Krishnamurti to experience their unified consciousness. Even the proud Kandorians offered gestures of support that their warrior culture typically reserved for blood relatives. When the last cadet had spoken, Lieutenant Krishnamurti stood alone with Commander Thexari and the holographic presence of Admiral Korvash. The weight of what she was about to attempt seemed to settle on her shoulders like physical mass. Second thoughts, Lieutenant? Admiral Korvash asked. No, sir. But I do have one request. Name it. When I reach the colony, I'd like a direct communication link back to the Academy. For tactical support? For perspective, she corrected. My classmates represent the finest military thinking in the galaxy. If I encounter problems I can't solve alone, their insights might make the difference. Admiral Korbash's expression showed what might have been approval. Granted. Anything else? Lieutenant Krishnamurti looked around the command center, taking in the faces of beings from dozens of different worlds who had come to see her off. When she spoke, her voice carried quiet determination. Just this, sir. When this is over, I want a chance to show my classmates that humans aren't the weakest species in the Alliance. And, what do you believe humans actually are? Admiral Korvash asked. For the first time since the emergency had begun, Lieutenant Krishnamurti smiled. We're the most stubborn. 18 hours later, she would discover just how accurate that assessment truly was. The stealth transport silent approach dropped out of quantum slip at the edge of the Kepler 442b system with barely a whisper of displaced space. Its advanced hull configuration, derived from Zarathi scout technology, rendered it effectively invisible to conventional sensors. In the passenger compartment, Lieutenant Zara Krishnamurti performed final equipment checks with the methodical precision that had impressed her instructors since her first day at the Academy. Her gear was deliberately minimal. Standard Alliance combat armor, modified with additional power cells and emergency medical supplies. A plasma rifle with 800 rounds of ammunition, carefully selected for maximum versatility rather than raw firepower. A collection of tools and components that most observers would have dismissed as spare parts but which she had specifically requested based on her analysis of the mining colony's industrial infrastructure. Most importantly, she carried a quantum communication device that would maintain constant contact with the Academy's command center. The device was small enough to be concealed but powerful enough to punch through the Void Collective's jamming systems. 30 minutes to insertion point, announced Captain Isakatar, the ship's draconian commander. His species shared Admiral Korbash's reputation for tactical excellence, and his voice carried the confidence of someone who had successfully completed dozens of covert operations. Copy that, Captain, Krishnamurti replied, though her attention remained focused on the holographic display showing real-time intelligence from the target zone.
The mining colony had been transformed in the 18 hours since the Void Collective's initial assault. What had once been a sprawling industrial complex now resembled a fortress. Defensive barriers constructed from salvaged mining equipment created overlapping fields of fire around key positions. Patrol routes had been established to cover every approach to the civilian shelters. Most ominously, construction had begun on what Alliance intelligence identified as a quantum communication array capable of calling in collective reinforcements from across the galaxy. Lieutenant, Captain Essie Katar's voice carried new urgency. We're receiving updated intelligence from the orbital reconnaissance platform. The holographic display shifted to show drone movement patterns around the colony. Krishnamurti studied the information with the same intensity she had brought to her simulation, but this time the stakes extended far beyond academic evaluation. They've established 3 primary patrol zones, she observed, noting how the collective forces had divided their attention. Central command around the main administrative complex, perimeter security along the old mining roads, and heavy concentration around the civilian shelter entrances. Classic siege configuration, Captain Esikatar agreed. Maximum control with minimal resource expenditure. Which means they're confident in their position, Krishnamurti concluded. That confidence could be exploited. The quantum communication device activated with a soft chime. Commander Thexari's voice emerged clearly despite the impossible distance between ship and Academy. Lieutenant Krishnamurti, this is Academy Control. We're monitoring your approach and ready to provide tactical support as requested. Copy, Control. Patch me through to the observation team. Within seconds, the voices of her classmates filled the transport's passenger compartment. Cadet Bortha's rumbling bass, HFY's precise articulation, the harmonic tones of the ethereal twins, and a dozen others representing the finest tactical minds of their respective species. Human, Bortha's voice carried uncharacteristic warmth. What do you see that we cannot? Krishnamurti studied the intelligence display one more time before answering. I see an enemy that's fighting the last war instead of this one. Explain, requested HFY's. The Void Collective has established defenses against conventional assault forces. Overlapping fire zones, redundant communications, centralized command structure. Everything designed to defeat an enemy that approaches with superior numbers and technology. That's exactly what Alliance Doctrine would recommend, pointed out one of the Kandorian cadets. Which is exactly why it won't work here, Krishnamurti replied. They're prepared for the kind of enemy they expect to face, not necessarily the kind of enemy they're actually going to face. And what kind of enemy is that? Asked Commander Thexari. One that doesn't follow their rules. Captain S.E. Katar announced 5 minutes to insertion. Krishnamurti began the final phase of her preparation, checking seals on her armor and ensuring her equipment was properly secured. But her mind was already on the surface, visualizing the terrain she had studied and planning her initial approach. The insertion itself was flawlessly executed. The silent approach descended through Kepler 442b's atmosphere using gravitational manipulation fields that left no energy signature, depositing its passenger in a rocky canyon approximately 15 kilometers from the mining colony. By the time the transport had departed for its return journey, Lieutenant Krishnamurti was already moving toward her objective. The planet's surface was harsher than the simulation had conveyed. Twin suns created overlapping shadows that shifted constantly throughout the day, making it difficult to maintain consistent concealment. The rocky terrain was sharp enough to damage equipment and treacherous enough to break bones. Most challenging of all, the thin atmosphere made every physical exertion twice as demanding as normal. For most species, such conditions would have represented a significant tactical disadvantage. For humans, they were simply another problem to be solved. Krishnamurti moved with careful deliberation, using natural cover to avoid the collective's long-range sensors while gradually closing distance to the colony. Her quantum communicator maintained constant contact with the Academy, allowing her classmates to follow her progress and offer insights based on their respective species' tactical doctrines. Movement pattern suggests you're approaching the southeastern perimeter, observed one of the Zarathi scouts. That sector shows minimal patrol activity on our sensors. Confirmed, Krishnamurti replied quietly. But minimal doesn't mean absent. I'm seeing evidence of recent drone passage along what looks like a secondary patrol route. She paused to examine scorch marks on the rocks where energy weapons had been test-fired. The pattern suggested that collective forces had established overlapping fields of observation, even in areas that appeared undefended.
They're more thorough than the simulation indicated, she reported.
Is that a problem? Asked Vorth. It's information, Krishnamurti corrected. Problems are just information we haven't figured out how to use yet.
As she reached the colony's outer perimeter, the full scale of her challenge became apparent. The Void Collective hadn't simply occupied the mining facility, they had transformed it into a fortress that would have challenged a full Alliance assault force. Defensive barriers created interlocking kill zones around every approach. Sensor arrays provided complete coverage of the surrounding terrain. Most daunting of all, patrol groups of 50 drones each moved in carefully coordinated patterns that eliminated any obvious gaps in their coverage. Lieutenant, Commander Thexari's voice carried new concern. Updated intelligence shows they've accelerated construction of the quantum communication array. If they complete it, they'll be able to summon reinforcements from across collective territory. How long until completion? Krishnamurti asked while studying the patrol patterns through her scope.
18 hours, maximum. That timeline changed everything.
Her original plan had assumed she would have at least 48 hours to disrupt enemy operations before civilian evacuation became critical. Now she was facing a much more compressed schedule with even higher stakes.
Understood, Control. Beginning operational phase now. Lieutenant, SIL-THYSS interrupted, the patrol patterns show no obvious weaknesses. How do you intend to penetrate their perimeter?
I don't, Krishnamurti replied simply.
Then, how?
I'm going to make them come to me.
What followed defied every principle of conventional military tactics.
Instead of attempting to sneak past the collective's defenses, Lieutenant Krishnamurti positioned herself in plain sight on a rocky outcrop 800 meters from the nearest patrol route.
Then, she began systematically eliminating individual drones with precisely placed shots from her plasma rifle. What are you doing? Vorth demanded over the communication link.
You're exposing yourself to their entire force. I'm providing them with target fixation, Krishnamurti replied calmly, her rifle speaking with metronomic precision. Watch their response patterns. The effect was immediate and predictable. Collective drones weren't capable of ignoring direct attack, even when tactical doctrine suggested a different response. Instead of maintaining their patrol patterns and reporting her position to command, the nearest groups immediately converged on her location. But Krishnamurti had chosen her position carefully. The rocky outcrop provided cover from multiple directions while offering clear fields of fire toward the approaching enemies.
More importantly, it channeled the attacking drones into a narrow approach that negated their numerical superiority.
She's turning their strength against them, observed one of the ethereal twins with something approaching awe.
The more drones they send, the more concentrated their formation becomes.
Making them easier targets for individual elimination, SIL-THYSS added, her scales showing the gold of tactical appreciation. For 30 minutes, Krishnamurti held her position against increasingly desperate attacks. Drone after drone fell to her precise fire, their bodies creating obstacles that further hindered their companions. The collective's response became increasingly frantic as they committed more and more resources to eliminating what they perceived as a significant threat. By the time Krishnamurti finally abandoned her position, she had achieved exactly what she intended. Nearly half of the collective's patrol forces had been drawn away from their defensive positions, creating gaps in coverage that hadn't existed before. More importantly, the remaining commanders were now focused on hunting down a single infiltrator rather than maintaining their overall defensive posture. Phase 1 complete, she reported while moving toward her next objective.
Collective forces are now reactive instead of proactive.
Brilliant tactical manipulation, Commander Thexari acknowledged. But, you've also made yourself their primary target.
Every drone on the planet will be hunting for you now.
That's the idea, Krishnamurti replied.
An enemy that's hunting can't simultaneously be defending.
Her next objective was the mining colony's primary power distribution center. During her initial briefing, she had noted that the facility's original designers had created a centralized system capable of supporting massive industrial operations. The Void Collective had maintained that system to power their own defensive installations, creating a single point of failure that conventional military thinking would never have targeted. After all, destroying the power grid would eliminate life support for the civilian shelters as well as disabling enemy defenses.
But Krishnamurti wasn't planning to destroy the power grid. She was planning to control it.
The facility's security was minimal compared to the colony's perimeter defenses. The collective had assumed that no enemy force could penetrate their outer barriers, making internal security a secondary concern. It took Krishnamurti less than 10 minutes to eliminate the guard drones and gain access to the main control systems. "Control, I'm interfacing with the colony's primary power distribution network," she reported while connecting her equipment to the facility's central computer. "Lieutenant," Commander Thexari's voice carried new alarm. "If you disrupt power to the civilian shelters." "I'm not disrupting it," Krishnamurti interrupted. "I'm rerouting it." What she had connected to the power grid wasn't a weapon or an explosive. It was a sophisticated control system she had assembled from the spare parts in her equipment kit. Parts that had seemed random to her instructors but which she had selected for exactly this purpose. The mining facility was designed to operate on variable power loads, she explained while her impromptu device interfaced with systems never intended to accept external control. Different mining operations required different power allocations throughout the day. The collective has been using steady-state power distribution, but the infrastructure still supports dynamic load management. "What does that accomplish?" asked Vorth. "Watch and learn," Krishnamurti replied, activating her control system. Throughout the mining colony, power distribution began fluctuating according to patterns that seemed random but were actually precisely calculated. Defensive barriers flickered on and off at irregular intervals. Sensor arrays experienced momentary failures that created brief gaps in coverage. Communication systems suffered intermittent disruptions that prevented coordinated responses to threats. But the civilian shelters maintained full power throughout the entire sequence. "Impossible," breathed Silty HYSS. "You've created selective system failures that only affect military targets." The collective's equipment interfaces with the existing power grid through standardized connections, Krishnamurti explained. But they never bothered to install their own dedicated power management systems. They're completely dependent on infrastructure they don't understand and can't control. The effect on collective operations was immediate and devastating. Patrol routes became confused as navigation systems failed. Communication between units became sporadic. Defensive positions found themselves unexpectedly vulnerable as their barriers flickered off at crucial moments. More importantly, the seemingly random failures made it impossible for the collective to identify the source of their problems. They began searching for saboteurs throughout the facility, further dispersing their forces and reducing their coordination. "Phase 2 complete," Krishnamurti reported. "The enemy is now fighting their own infrastructure as much as they're fighting me." "Outstanding work, Lieutenant," Admiral Korbash's voice joined the communication channel. "But intelligence indicates they're accelerating quantum communicator construction. You need to prevent them from calling for reinforcements." Krishnamurti checked her chronometer. 14 hours remaining until civilian evacuation became critical. The quantum communicator represented a threat that could extend the crisis indefinitely if allowed to come online. But it also represented her greatest opportunity. "Control, I need detailed specifications on collective quantum communication technology," she requested while moving toward her next objective. "Transmitting now," replied the Academy's intelligence officer. "But, Lieutenant, that installation is their most heavily defended position. Any approach will be met with overwhelming force." "Not if they don't see me coming," Krishnamurti replied, studying the technical specifications on her display. "The facility is surrounded by open ground," Vorth pointed out. "There's no cover for a minimum of 300 meters in any direction." "Who said anything about approaching from ground level?" Krishnamurti asked. What she had identified was an approach that no military tactician would have considered because it required capabilities that no other species possessed. The mining colony's original construction had included an extensive network of maintenance tunnels connecting all major facilities. The tunnels were too small for most sentient species to navigate and were considered tactically irrelevant. But they were exactly the right size for a human. "I'm going underground," Krishnamurti announced, locating a maintenance access point near the power distribution center. "Those tunnels weren't designed for military operations," Commander Thexari warned. "They're barely large enough for maintenance robots." "Then, it's a good thing humans are about the same size as maintenance robots," Krishnamurti replied, removing the access panel and examining the tunnel beyond. What followed was the most challenging phase of her mission yet. The maintenance tunnels were cramped, poorly ventilated, and filled with obstacles ranging from power conduits to automated systems that weren't designed to accommodate human passage. Progress was measured in meters per hour rather than kilometers.
But, the tunnels also provided something that no conventional approach could offer: complete invisibility to enemy detection systems. The collective sensors were configured to monitor surface approaches and aerial threats. They had never considered the possibility that an attacker might approach through the facility's own infrastructure. Status report, Lieutenant Admiral Korvash requested after an hour of radio silence. Making progress, Krishnamurti replied, though her voice showed the strain of navigating the confined spaces. Should reach the quantum communicator facility within 2 hours. Can you destroy it? Asked HFY. Destruction would be too obvious, Krishnamurti replied. The collective would simply rebuild it. I need to do something more subtle. Such as? For the first time since beginning her mission, Lieutenant Krishnamurti allowed herself a smile that none of her academy classmates could see. I'm going to reprogram it. The quantum communication facility rose from the center of the mining colony like a technological cathedral, its crystalline antenna array reaching toward the twin suns of Kepler 442b. Void Collective engineers had worked continuously since the initial assault to complete construction, understanding that success of their entire operation depended on establishing contact with their reinforcement fleets. Beneath the facility, Lieutenant Zara Krishnamurti emerged from a maintenance access point directly into the building's primary server chamber. 3 hours of crawling through passages designed for automated systems had left her armor scraped and her body aching, but her mind remained focused on the task ahead. The server chamber hummed with alien technology that represented the pinnacle of collective communication systems. Quantum processors capable of instantaneous contact across galactic distances lined the walls, their biomechanical interfaces pulsing with organic rhythms that spoke to the collective's fusion of living tissue and advanced engineering. Control, I'm inside the quantum communicator facility, Krishnamurti reported quietly, her voice barely above a whisper to avoid triggering acoustic sensors. Outstanding work, Lieutenant Admiral Korvash replied through the quantum link. What's your assessment of the situation? Krishnamurti studied the alien technology with the same analytical intensity she had brought to every challenge since arriving at the academy. Where her classmates might have seen incomprehensible enemy systems, she saw patterns, connections, and possibilities. The facility is more advanced than our intelligence indicated, she reported. But, it's also more vulnerable. Explain, requested Commander Thaxari. The collective has integrated their quantum communicators with the colony's existing computer networks to access local infrastructure support. They're using our own systems to power and coordinate their equipment. That should make sabotage easier, observed Vorth. Destroy the integration interfaces and the facility becomes non-functional. Destruction would be temporary, Krishnamurti corrected. They'd rebuild the interfaces within hours. But, integration means I can access their systems from the inside. She began connecting her portable computer to the facility's network through maintenance ports that the collective engineers had never bothered to secure. Why would they? The very idea that an enemy could penetrate to the heart of their most protected installation was beyond their conception of possible threats. I'm accessing their communication protocols now, Krishnamurti reported as alien code began flowing across her display. Their system architecture is fascinating. They're not just building a communicator, they're building a command and control node. What's the difference? Asked HFY. A communicator sends messages, Krishnamurti explained while studying the data streams. A command node coordinates operations across multiple star systems. They're planning to use this facility to direct collective forces throughout this entire sector of the galaxy. The implications were staggering. Rather than simply calling for reinforcements, the Void Collective intended to establish Kepler 442b as a permanent command center for expansion into Alliance territory. The civilian population would become permanent hostages, ensuring that the Alliance couldn't risk orbital bombardment to retake the world. Lieutenant Admiral Korvash's voice carried new urgency. That facility must not be allowed to come online. Agreed, sir. But, I have a better idea than just preventing activation. Which is? What if instead of stopping them from calling their reinforcements, we made sure they called the wrong ones? The silence that followed suggested her academy classmates were processing the implications of what she had proposed. Finally, Commander Thaxari spoke with careful precision. Lieutenant, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm suggesting that a communication system powerful enough to coordinate collective forces across multiple star systems might also be powerful enough to coordinate alliance forces across multiple star systems, Krishnamurti replied.
assuming someone knew how to modify the targeting protocols.
That would require completely reprogramming their quantum encryption algorithms, SILTHYSS pointed out.
Such systems are specifically designed to be tamper-proof.
Tamper-proof against external attack, Krishnamurti corrected.
But they have to be modifiable by authorized users, or the collective wouldn't be able to operate them. You're not an authorized user, Vorth observed. Not yet, she agreed, her fingers flying across her portable computer's interface.
But I'm working on that. What Krishnamurti had discovered was a fundamental vulnerability in the collective's approach to system security.
Their biomechanical technology required constant interaction between organic and artificial components, creating authorization protocols that depended on biological verification rather than traditional encryption methods. But the facility had been constructed using components from the mining colony's original computer networks, systems that still retained their original programming languages and interface protocols. By accessing the facility through those legacy systems, Krishnamurti could bypass the collective's security entirely.
This is incredible, she reported as alien code began yielding to her manipulation. Their quantum communicator is essentially a collective computer running on Alliance infrastructure.
It has to translate between completely different technological paradigms every time it processes information.
Can you exploit the translation process? Asked one of the ethereal twins.
Already am, Krishnamurti replied. I'm inserting modified translation algorithms that will redirect their communication protocols without triggering their security systems. The work required absolute precision.
A single mistake would trigger alarms that would bring every drone in the facility down on her position.
But Krishnamurti had spent months studying alien programming languages as part of her academy curriculum, and her understanding of system integration far exceeded what most considered necessary for military operations.
Hour by hour, she rewrote the fundamental operating protocols of the most advanced communication system the Void Collective had ever constructed.
Instead of connecting to their reinforcement fleets, the modified system would establish contact with Alliance Command. Instead of coordinating collective forces, it would provide real-time intelligence on enemy positions and capabilities.
Phase 3 approaching completion, she reported as the last modifications were integrated into the system.
When they attempt to activate the communicator, they'll be directly connected to Admiral Korvash instead of their own fleet commanders. Brilliant tactical manipulation, Admiral Korvash acknowledged. But that still leaves you surrounded by 3,000 hostile drones with no means of escape. Actually, sir, it gives me something much more valuable than an escape route, Krishnamurti replied.
It gives me a way to turn their entire force against them. Explain. The quantum communicator isn't just connected to their reinforcement fleets.
It's connected to every drone, every weapon system, and every command interface in their entire operation.
When I trigger the modifications, I won't just be redirecting their external communications. I'll have access to their internal command structure. The implications began to sink in among her academy classmates. Cadet Vorth was the first to voice what they were all thinking.
You're planning to take control of their entire army.
Not take control, Krishnamurti corrected. I'm planning to convince them to take control of themselves.
Before anyone could ask for clarification, proximity alarms throughout the facility began blaring.
The collective had finally detected the breach in their security, though they still didn't understand its extent.
Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors above as assault teams moved to investigate.
Lieutenant, you need to extract immediately, Admiral Korvash ordered. Negative, sir. I need 30 more minutes to complete the final programming sequences. You don't have 30 minutes, Commander Thexari warned. Enemy forces are converging on your position.
Krishnamurti checked the progress of her modifications. The quantum communicator systems were incredibly complex, requiring her to rewrite thousands of lines of code to achieve seamless integration with Alliance communication protocols. But she was close, so close that abandoning the work now would waste everything she had accomplished. Control, I'm staying to finish the job, she announced, drawing her plasma rifle while maintaining her connection to the enemy computer system.
That's suicide, Vorth protested.
You can't fight an entire assault force while simultaneously conducting complex programming operations. Watch me, Krishnamurti replied simply. The first collective drones burst through the server chamber's main entrance just as her portable computer indicated successful integration of the final program modifications. She triggered the activation sequence with one hand while opening fire with the other, catching the leading attackers in a crossfire that dropped 3 of them before they could return fire. But the facility had been designed as a fortress, and the server chamber had only one exit. As more drones poured through the entrance, Krishnamurti found herself in exactly the kind of conventional firefight that human physiology couldn't win. Her armor deflected the first few energy bolts, but sustained fire would inevitably penetrate her defenses. That was when the quantum communicator activated. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Throughout the mining colony, every piece of collective equipment suddenly began receiving new instructions through their own command network. Defensive barriers rotated to face inward instead of outward. Artillery systems retargeted from external threats to internal positions. Most critically, the identification protocols that distinguished friendly forces from enemies were completely scrambled. "What's happening?" demanded the lead collective overseer through the facility's communication system. "Unknown malfunction in primary command network," reported another voice. "All units are receiving contradictory orders. Emergency shutdown of all automated systems," the overseer commanded. "Switch to manual control immediately." But manual control required time to implement, and the collective's integrated command structure had been designed to prevent exactly that kind of rapid system modification. As confusion spread through their ranks, Krishnamurti pressed her advantage. "Alliance Command, this is Lieutenant Krishnamurti," she announced through the now functional quantum communicator. "I have control of enemy communications. Ready to coordinate immediate response." Admiral Korvash's voice emerged from every speaker in the facility. "Confirmed, Lieutenant. We're reading full access to collective command systems. Beginning coordination of rescue operations now." Throughout the mining colony, the situation rapidly devolved into chaos. Collective drones found themselves receiving orders to attack their own defensive positions. Command overseers discovered that their communication systems were broadcasting their positions and battle plans directly to Alliance forces. The quantum communicator that was supposed to summon reinforcements instead guided Alliance evacuation ships directly to the civilian shelter locations. But Krishnamurti's position remained critical. The server chamber had become the focal point of every collective force still capable of independent action. As her ammunition ran low, the tactical situation approached desperation. "Lieutenant," SIL-THYSS's voice carried new urgency, "can you use their own weapon systems against them?" "Already trying," Krishnamurti replied while diving for cover behind a bank of quantum processors. "But I need direct access to their automated defense grid." "The primary control interface should be in the main command chamber," one of the ethereal twins observed. "3 levels above your current position. Occupied by approximately 50 enemy soldiers," Vorth added grimly. Krishnamurti checked her remaining ammunition. 37 rounds in her current clip, plus 2 spare power cells. Against 50 drones in fortified positions, those resources represented a mathematical impossibility. But mathematics had never stopped her before. "Control, I'm moving to Phase 4, she announced, gathering her equipment and preparing to abandon the server chamber. "What's Phase 4? Admiral Korvash asked. "Phase 4 is where I stop running from them and start making them run from me," Krishnamurti replied, activating the maintenance tunnel access point that had brought her to this position. "How?" For the second time during her mission, Lieutenant Krishnamurti allowed herself a smile that her academy classmates couldn't see. By giving them exactly what they've been trying to achieve. As she disappeared into the maintenance tunnels, heading for a confrontation that would determine the fate of 40,000 civilians, her quantum communicator carried one final transmission back to the academy. "Tell my classmates that humans aren't the weakest species in the Alliance. We're just the most creative." Above her, 50 Void collective drones prepared defensive positions around equipment they no longer understood, to fight an enemy they couldn't predict, for objectives that were no longer their own. They had no idea that their greatest threat was about to become their worst nightmare. The main command chamber of the quantum communication facility had been transformed into the Void Collective's ultimate stronghold. 50 elite drones, each standing 7 feet tall and armed with the most advanced weapons their technology could provide, had established overlapping defensive positions around the central command console. Their chitinous armor gleamed with biomechanical enhancements that made them nearly impervious to conventional weapons. At the center of this fortress sat Overseer Prime Kethvor, a collective commander whose tactical brilliance had conquered 17 star systems. His organic components pulsed with the dark energy that powered his species' most advanced technology, while his mechanical enhancements provided him with processing capabilities that rivaled quantum computers. Status report, he demanded through the facility's internal communication system.
Unknown saboteur has compromised our communication networks, reported Sub-Overseer Yarthak. All automated systems are responding to unauthorized commands. Then, we eliminate the saboteur manually, Kethvor decided. Initiate total facility lockdown. Nothing moves without my direct authorization. Heavy blast doors sealed every entrance to the command chamber.
Energy barriers activated around critical systems. The 50 elite drones took positions that provided complete coverage of every possible approach route. By any reasonable military analysis, the position was absolutely impregnable.
Which was exactly what Lieutenant Zara Krishnamurti had been counting on.
3 levels below, she emerged from the maintenance tunnel system directly into the facility's primary power distribution center. The same cramped passages that had allowed her to infiltrate the quantum communicator now provided access to systems that the collective had never considered worth defending. Control, I'm in position for final phase operations, she reported through her quantum communicator.
Lieutenant, Admiral Korvash's voice carried deep concern. Intelligence shows 50 enemy soldiers in fortified positions between you and the command center.
Even with surprise, those odds are impossible. Sir, with respect, you're thinking like a conventional military tactician, Krishnamurti replied while examining the facility's power distribution systems.
Sometimes the best way to take a position isn't to attack it at all. Then, what do you propose?
I propose giving them exactly what they want most, she answered, connecting her portable computer to the power grid's central control node.
Complete control of their own facility.
What Krishnamurti had realized was that the Void Collective's greatest strength could also become their greatest weakness. Their biomechanical technology required constant integration between organic and artificial components, creating dependencies that went far beyond simple power requirements.
Every drone in the facility depended on environmental systems that maintained precise atmospheric conditions for their biological components.
Their weapons required specific energy frequencies that could only be generated by the facility's power grid. Even their armor systems needed constant data feeds from Central Command to maintain optimal defensive configurations. By taking control of those underlying systems, she wouldn't need to fight the drones at all. She could simply make their technology work against them. Beginning environmental modifications now, she reported while her computer interfaced with the facility's atmospheric controls.
What kind of modifications? Asked Commander Thexari. The kind that turn their biological advantages into biological liabilities.
Void Collective drones were adapted to survive in environments that would kill most other species. Their natural atmosphere contained trace amounts of methane and sulfur compounds that enhanced their physical capabilities.
But those same adaptations made them vulnerable to sudden changes in atmospheric composition.
Krishnamurti began introducing pure oxygen into the facility's air supply. Not enough to create an explosion hazard, but enough to gradually poison the drone's biological systems. Simultaneously, she adjusted the facility's gravitational compensators to create subtle variations in local gravity that would interfere with their coordination.
Environmental parameters changing throughout the facility, reported Sub-Overseer Yarthak. Atmospheric composition shifting toward Alliance standard specifications.
Compensate with internal filtration systems, Overseer Prime Kethvor ordered.
Internal systems are not responding to commands, Yarthak replied with growing alarm.
Primary control interfaces show authorized operation, but actual system responses are contradictory. That was because Krishnamurti had done much more than simply modify environmental controls. Using her access to the facility's computer networks, she had reprogrammed the fundamental relationship between command inputs and system responses.
When collective operators issued orders, their equipment would acknowledge receipt and report successful implementation while actually doing the opposite. Phase 1 of final operation complete, Krishnamurti reported. Enemy forces are now fighting their own equipment. But environmental modifications would take time to affect the drone's combat capabilities.
For immediate tactical advantage, she needed to neutralize their weapons and defensive systems directly. Control, I'm accessing the facility's primary weapons grid, she announced while connecting to the defense network that controlled automated turrets throughout the complex. Those weapons are heavily encrypted, warns Silty HYSS.
Collective security protocols should prevent unauthorized access. They would, if I were trying to access them as an outsider, Krishnamurti agreed. But, I'm accessing them as an authorized maintenance system.
The facility's original designers had included comprehensive maintenance protocols that allowed automated systems to perform diagnostics and repairs without manual oversight. Those protocols still existed within the computer networks, overlooked by collective engineers who had focused on preventing external attacks rather than internal system manipulation. By masquerading as a maintenance routine, Krishnamurti could access every weapon system in the facility with complete administrative privileges. More importantly, she could modify their operational parameters without triggering any security alarms.
Weapons grid accessed successfully, she reported.
Beginning tactical modifications.
Throughout the facility, automated turrets began rotating away from their assigned fields of fire. Energy weapons found their targeting systems gradually losing calibration.
Most critically, the identification protocols that distinguished friendly forces from targets were quietly reversed.
Weapons malfunction in sectors 7 through 12, reported another sub-overseer. Automated defenses are not responding to targeting commands.
Switch all systems to manual control, Kethvor commanded with growing frustration.
Manual control interfaces are not accepting input, came the reply.
Systems report normal operation, but actual responses are inconsistent with commands. That inconsistency was exactly what Krishnamurti had designed. Rather than completely disabling collective systems, which would have triggered immediate attention, she had created subtle modifications that made their equipment unreliable without making it obviously compromised. Sir, Admiral Korvash's voice carried new respect, you're systematically dismantling their entire defensive capability without firing a single shot.
Firing shots draws attention, Krishnamurti replied while initiating the next phase of her plan. Making their own weapons fire at them is much more effective.
The automated defense systems throughout the facility were now completely under her control. But, rather than simply turning them against the collective forces, she implemented a more sophisticated strategy. She programmed the systems to activate in sequence, creating the impression that the facility was under attack by multiple infiltrators approaching from different directions. Enemy contact in Maintenance Sector Alpha, she announced through the facility's communication system, using a voice synthesizer to mimic collective speech patterns.
Multiple targets approaching primary defensive positions.
The effect was immediate and exactly what she had anticipated. Overseer Prime Kethvor immediately began redeploying his forces to meet the reported threats, dividing his concentrated defensive position into smaller, more vulnerable units.
Squad 7 to Maintenance Sector Alpha, he commanded. Investigate and eliminate intruders.
Squad 12 to secondary access routes, he continued.
Prevent enemy flanking maneuvers.
As the elite drones left their fortified positions to respond to phantom threats, Krishnamurti monitored their movements through the facility's security system. Each redeployment weakened the central command chamber's defenses while exposing the individual squads to the automated weapons systems she now controlled. Contact confirmed in Sector Alpha, she announced through the communication system as the first squad approached her simulated target zone.
Enemy forces engaging defensive positions.
On cue, the automated turrets in that sector activated, targeting the collective drones based on her modified identification protocols. The drones found themselves under fire from their own defensive systems, unable to understand why their equipment had turned against them.
Our own weapons are firing on our forces, reported Sub-Overseer Yarthak with panic creeping into his voice. Impossible, Kethvor replied. Those systems are hardwired to prevent friendly fire incidents. Nevertheless, Squad 7 is taking casualties from automated defensive fire.
Similar reports began flooding in from across the facility. Everywhere that collective forces moved, they found themselves targeted by their own security systems.
Environmental controls made breathing difficult.
Gravity fluctuations interfered with their coordination. Even the facility's lighting systems had been modified to create disorienting patterns that hindered their ability to function effectively. Lieutenant, Vortha's voice carried amazement, you've turned their entire facility into a weapon against them. More than that, Krishnamurti replied, checking the tactical display that showed collective force distribution throughout the complex.
I've turned them into their own worst enemy.
With most of the elite drones scattered throughout the facility chasing phantom threats, the main command chamber now held fewer than 20 defenders. Still significant odds, but manageable compared to the original 50. More importantly, those remaining defenders were now dealing with equipment failures, environmental problems, and communication disruptions that made coordinated defense nearly impossible. Time for the final approach, Krishnamurti announced, gathering her equipment and moving toward the maintenance shaft that would bring her directly into the command chamber. Lieutenant, Admiral Korvash's voice carried both admiration and concern. Even with everything you've accomplished, you're still facing 20 elite enemies in their strongest defensive position. Sir, those 20 enemies are about to discover that their strongest defensive position has become their weakest offensive liability, she replied. The maintenance shaft that provided access to the command chamber was designed for automated repair systems, not human infiltration. But it also bypassed every security measure the collective had installed, emerging directly behind the central command console where Overseer Prime Kethvor maintained his position. As Krishnamurti prepared for her final approach, her quantum communicator crackled with transmissions from across the mining colony. Alliance evacuation ships were successfully extracting civilians from the underground shelters. The tactical intelligence provided by her hijacked communication systems had allowed rescue operations to proceed without interference from collective forces. Evacuation 70% complete, Admiral Korvash reported. Outstanding work, Lieutenant. Not finished yet, sir, she replied, beginning her ascent through the final maintenance shaft. The command chamber's blast doors and energy barriers that had seemed so impregnable from the outside meant nothing to someone approaching from within the facility's own infrastructure. Krishnamurti emerged silently behind the central command console, her plasma rifle ready for the confrontation that would determine the success or failure of her entire mission. Overseer Prime Kethvor stood with his back to her, frantically trying to regain control of systems that no longer responded to his commands. Around the chamber, his remaining elite drones struggled with equipment malfunctions and environmental problems that grew worse by the minute. Overseer Prime, Krishnamurti announced, her weapon trained on the massive alien commander. Kethvor turned slowly, his biomechanical enhancements processing the impossibility of what he was seeing. A single human, barely half his size, standing calmly in the heart of his most secure facility. How, he demanded, his translator making his alien speech comprehensible. By remembering that the strongest fortress becomes the weakest prison when someone else controls the locks, Krishnamurti replied. The remaining drones began moving to surround her, but their coordination was hampered by the atmospheric modifications and gravitational fluctuations she had introduced. More critically, their weapons systems were still responding to her modified targeting protocols, making accurate fire nearly impossible. You cannot defeat the Void Collective, Kethvor declared. We are inevitable. You are defeated, Krishnamurti interrupted quietly. Your forces are scattered. Your weapons are compromised. Your communication systems belong to us. Your facility is under Alliance control. She activated her quantum communicator one final time. Admiral Korvash, this is Lieutenant Krishnamurti. Mission complete. The mining colony is secured for civilian evacuation. Through speakers throughout the facility, Admiral Korvash's voice carried absolute authority. Overseer Prime Kethvor, you are ordered to surrender all remaining forces immediately. Continued resistance will result in the complete destruction of your position. Kethvor's biomechanical systems pulsed with rage and disbelief. One human. One small, weak human accomplished all of this. Not small, Krishnamurti corrected, her weapon never wavering from its target. Not weak. Just different. The surrender came not through formal declaration, but through the simple recognition that further resistance was impossible. One by one, the elite drones deactivated their weapons as their equipment continued to malfunction. Environmental systems that no longer supported their biology forced them to conserve energy for survival rather than combat. Within 6 hours, the last civilian had been evacuated from the mining colony. Within 12 hours, Alliance reinforcements had arrived to secure the facility and process the surrendered collective forces. Within 24 hours, Lieutenant Zara Krishnamurti was back aboard the transport Silent Approach, returning to the Galactic Military Academy with a mission completion record that would be studied by military tacticians for generations. But the most important moment came as she walked back into the Academy's main briefing room, where her classmates waited in absolute silence. Cadet Vorth, whose species had conquered star systems through pure physical might, stood and began to applaud. One by one, every other cadet,